hours before my classmates. And what's the first thing I do? I go for a run. And no, not just any run. I like to run a marathon. I'll usually keep running until my legs feel like they're about to collapse. Then once I come home, I like to jump right into a cold shower. Actually, no, it's not just a cold shower. It's a freezing cold shower. Sometimes the water is so cold that icicles start to form on the shower head. Only once I've lost all motor function in my fingers, I'll decide to jump out and start my next habit of the day, meditation. Now this one's special. I'll sit still for hours as I contemplate the meaning of the universe. I'll dwell on string theory and the Big Bang as I listen to Mozart's entire discography. And after that, well, it's time for breakfast. Nothing like some straight vegetables and a cup of water to start the day. Usually by now it's around 3:30 a.m. So I'll spend the next 4 hours before school reading up on next week's lectures. And of course, this is all a lie. I never have and never will ever in my life wake up at 3 in the morning. And cold showers? I don't really like them. Let's break down the 5 habits that actually help me succeed as a student. Alright, let's break down habit number 1. Back in high school, I would follow an after-school routine. And I genuinely believe this is one of the best habits that you can form as a student. Now here's the reality for most students that you might even be familiar with. They'll come home from school, they'll sit on the couch, they'll bring out their phone, and they'll end up scrolling for hours on end. The whole point of having an after-school routine, and more importantly, actually following it, is to make sure you don't get lost in this rabbit hole. Essentially, you want to make it as easy as possible to jump into work as soon as you come home. But Gohar, what if I'm exhausted and don't want to do any work? You know what? You can take a break, but here's the thing. You have to use a timer. Don't just sit on the couch and tell yourself, oh, I'm just taking a little break. If you want to take an actual break, but make sure that in 15 minutes or in 30 minutes, your alarm goes off and you get to work. Otherwise, you'll just find yourself scrolling TikTok endlessly. Now, here's what my routine roughly looked like in high school. I would come home from school and I would relax for 10 to 15 minutes. Then I'd spend the next 10 to 15 minutes getting ready to work both physically and mentally. I'd clean up my workspace, I'd bring out my supplies, I'd update my to-do list, I'd make sure that everything that I needed to work was primed and ready to go. And then I'd just jump right into work. I would grind for anywhere between 30 minutes to an hour, or just when it was time to eat dinner. After dinner, I'd come back to my desk and I'd start my first real grind session of the day. I would sometimes work for 2, 3, or even 4 hours straight. But now here's the thing. Every student grinds differently. Some students prefer to focus on one different subject every single day. For example, they might do math on Monday, science on Tuesday, English on Wednesday, and so on. Other students, myself included, prefer to do a little bit of each subject every single day. And that leads me into my next habit. For pretty much all of high school and college, I would evenly distribute everything. For example, if I had 2 weeks to do a 70-page AP Psych reading, I would read 5 pages every day. If I had 3 days to do 24 AP Calc problems, I would answer 8 problems every day. Honestly, this habit gave me so much comfort because it prevented me from cramming. There were so many points during freshman year of high school when I had 1, 2, or even 3 weeks to do an assignment, but I would find myself doing it within the final few days. And I'm gonna be honest with you, I still follow this habit to this day. For example, when it came to this video, I had around 7 scenes and 7 days to shoot it, so I've been shooting 1 scene every day. Yes, I find this habit pretty helpful, but I think the next one is what actually allowed me to get straight A's. Alright, before we jump into the next habit, I want to talk a little bit about how school can be pretty stressful at times. Not only do you have to balance academics with extracurriculars, but you also have to think about friends, family, hobbies, and so much more. Look, all of this is a natural part of being a student, and if you find yourself feeling pretty stressed, know that you're not alone. But I get it, sometimes it might just feel like too much and you really want to talk to someone, and that's where the sponsor of this video comes in. First month. Alright, now on to the next habit. Alright, I have some good news and I have some bad news. So I'm guessing you want to hear the bad news first. Out of all the habits that I'm going through in this video, this is probably the one that's the hardest to implement. But the good news is that out of all the habits, this is probably the one that'll have the biggest impact on your grades. Alright, you need to get into the habit of confronting your knowledge gaps. And now you might be sitting there saying, well, Gohar, I already do that. I study every single day, I go through my flashcards, and so on. And yes, this is a way of confronting your knowledge gaps, but I genuinely believe the students who do well in school go one step further. So let's walk through a little scenario. Let's say you're sitting in APUSH and your teacher's handing back the last exam. You get yours back and you see you got 5 out of 30 questions wrong. You start flipping through your exam packet, you look at each error, but you just tell yourself, oh, these were dumb mistakes. And then let's say a few hours later, you're sitting at home studying for the next APUSH exam, and you come across the terms horizontal integration and vertical integration. Now deep down, you know you don't fully understand these terms, but what do? Because you've heard of them before and because they sound vaguely familiar, you just say, oh yeah, I know what these mean, and you move on. Look, if you have had this experience, you are not alone, and I have had it myself plenty of times. But the reality is, in these situations, you have to accept what it is you don't know and do do whatever you can to fill in that knowledge gap. For example, if you get an exam question wrong, instead of just dismissing it, I want you to imagine yourself taking that exam again and answering that exact same question. Go through your train of logic, rewrite these steps if necessary, and figure out exactly where things went wrong. Similarly, if